We push into the 10:30 a.m. turn. It's time for the French, and here we are with weird little things. As far as I know, yeah, objections to the ambiguity of the game, right? As far as I can tell, from what I remember at least, is there's no real time within the sequence of play that you handle orders writing or assignment, however you want to do it. The tactical orders would be the first level of this, and it doesn't really say when to use this. Therefore, I'm going to follow general rules, and you spawn your orders writer before you take the rest of the turn, I guess. I don't know. Again, it's not really a fully developed game here, and that's really strange since I think the rules started out in the mid-'80s. But I think it's actually one of the design considerations of this game to say, we're not going to actually fully define the game for you. First thing in order of business here is I remove those charge markers, and now the French are in kind of a weird position. Maybe not with this unit, but this guy can't charge. He would love to, which means the Spanish aren't going to pay a price for leaving these cav here. They would in the basic game. So now it becomes kind of difficult to get out of position. And I'm not sure how much I really want to. If I move into a hex, I can be countercharged. So, maybe I want to move out here, which I can do easily. But this guy, maybe I'll just leave him sitting here. There's the best. I looked at orders. I don't have anything I want to do. I'm going to use Mortier to pull some more of the units under his command forward. One big reason is I'm limited to kind of this command. If I move forward much more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if I bring these forward as more of an echelon, I can hit a little harder in the center, and then I can leave this wing in place for now. I can always pull Mortier back to try to send some reinforcements into place. Again, I'm not allowing Soul to issue commands on his own. If I did, the French would be under almost no restrictions in movement, just because they have enough leaders for all their units. We're at not an ambiguity, but what I consider to be a poor rules layout, which is each unit, order type, formation type, having all the rules specified for it, when many of those rules are kind of general rules. For example, there seems to be a general rule that if you're attacked from the flank or rear, your strength is halved. That may not be the case. Cav in column, their flank and rear attacks are described in 8.6 as opposed to everywhere else. Melee is halved when attacked from flank or rear. Okay, that sounds the same as everything else. So they repeat this, which is just wasteful, but it's also hard to find what you're looking for. To remember that there's this aspect when every single unit has its own special, what looks like special cases. They really aren't. They're just poorly laid out in the way that they're repetitive. Familiarity will certainly breed, not contempt, but, well, the capability to handle. It'll breed memory, let's say. I've already thrown some skirmishers out to clear the way. A couple here, a couple here. I don't know if I've got others. This one's going to have to be cleared. I probably don't want to throw skirmishers everywhere, but I do want to kind of make my path easy so I don't have to wade through them. There is sort of a zone of control in the sense that if I march into here, I get shot at. So I probably don't want to move forward. I probably want to push the enemy out of the way. a gap isn't, a single hex gap isn't that big a deal. But what I'm considering is, did I want to go into column formation? And that's why I started looking these up. And because I was looking here, and something I expected to see, which was a higher melee strength, does not more steps, obviously, but a higher melee strength. But no, it's not there. And the reason for that is you have a built-in +1 to your melee strength if you attack in column. I don't think that's enough to take that situation, simply because my firepower is going to be reduced. Granted, these aren't big units, so it's kind of a weird thing. So columns of smaller steps are probably, well, no, because it's just multiplied by the number of steps. So there's no weird little game there. I was thinking that if your melee value increases on a per unit basis, but no, it's on a per step basis, so no biggie there. I actually am having trouble remembering because each step is big. In NBS and the CWB-based systems like it, I do still have little markers, A, B, C, whatever, without the number of steps present in some kind of numerical marker. Certainly I could throw some in. There are plenty there right now, at least. I'm left with kind of a, gosh, I don't know what I have on the board. I'm used to, you know, in the NBS CWB, hey, I got at least an A, you know, I can go in there. Well, no, that doesn't seem to work here. I'm constantly having to reference there, so I think I may end up putting counters, numeric counters underneath the units to indicate the number of steps. It's one of the options, but I was hoping to get away from it because I was so used to playing games where I didn't need to do that necessarily, but I needed to do it because the step levels in NBS, first of all, if you're above a certain size unit, they just don't matter. They matter in melee, but you don't do melee as often as I'm considering here. And secondly, different scenario, right? Secondly, there's the fact that there are counters to put reduction in place, but the granularity of each of those steps is much less, so it takes less different kinds of counters. So, you know, if you see a unit with a counter under it, you know, first of all, it's kind of weak. And secondly, then you can look and see, hey, is it a B or a C that I have under there or whatever. My difficulty at reading the counters has caused a serious problem. I have some artillery that somehow I charged into combat. That's clearly not there. I don't know where it was, probably from up here. I'm going to slide this unit in instead, although that kind of weakens my position a little bit, but I have shifted some forces over, and I'll push this guy over here. I'll figure the Spanish aren't going to try to launch an attack, because if that fails, the town might fall. And that's not a strong defensive position, but it does, especially with the embankment or whatever, the steep bridge that it's on, it does provide a certain level of security that there won't be an attack there. Blew through firepower, but a little bit. One assault by Mortier, which cleared a little path. We see the Spaniards are losing their center, but the French definitely have taken some disruption losses, and as we said, noted before, their casualties are a little low. I'm having a lot of trouble still translating from, you know, what you're used to in a war game of a tactical nature, which is most of the information being on the map, to having to continuously look here. We'll see, you know, how much it holds up. Worst comes to worse, it really isn't any worse than a number marker system as far as I'm concerned, because if there are number markers, I'm constantly going to be fumbling to look for these. And I found these long counters, even with tweezers in play, aren't terribly easy to get a good grip on without flipping them over or something. The initial assault, now we're here in the, starting the 11 a.m. turn. Some fire actually knocked one of these batteries back. And by disordering the battery, since it can't leave the hex, the infantry automatically run, which is kind of screwy to tell you the truth, but however. And the batteries there unmanned at this point. Until it rallies. But it is allowed to limber and get out of the line if I really needed to fill that gap in. Mortier, defensive fire, actually punched some of the Spaniards back a little bit, and then there was a Spanish assault from here. Flank attack, again, flank halves the defender, so he was able to get a 2-to-1 attack because he's kind of weakened that unit a little bit. But at the -2 for Mortier's military capabilities, the Spanish general, I can't read it very well, and I'm not used to it enough to pronounce it, but Arriazaga was able to, he's moving forward, but he's not going to have any real effect on the ground combat. So I'm kind of keeping him behind the lines. He doesn't have to remain stacked with the unit. No new orders for the French. I'm still trying to punch my way through. I think it's going to be pretty hard to get that massive French victory. Right now, point-wise, the French are still losing, you know, the loss game, but they've brought it closer in line, basically by being in place, able to fire some defensive fire. Their units are beginning to show a little bit more effectively. And there were a bunch of skirmishers that I sent out. Hey, it's not bad the way they come out and cancel each other out and everything. It feels a little bit like mechanical overkill, but I don't mind things like that. And it's kind of cool, you know, you have so many options in the game. The only problem is the rulebook, because it gives them all as options, is difficult to navigate for that and other reasons. I like playing with them all, but I can certainly see people not wanting to play with something like the skirmishers. I'm not so sure about, say, cav differentials between the different types of cav, or without some form of orders rules. However, even if it's just the make sure you have your units in command control, but, you know, the game doesn't seem to give any real preference to any of these. It's just, hey, here's a bunch of ideas, you know. All right, here we are, start of 11 a.m. A few things that maybe I didn't mention at the end of the last situation. First, the French cav has recycled. It's ready for another charge. I'm going to see if we can brush the Spaniards out of the way. Secondly, this was something I definitely intended to mention. This is the turn where guys on turn 1 can start trying to roll for rally. They're going to be rolling a morale check. And they may have, they don't take the disorganized modifier, I don't think, but I'll have to look that up. That comes at the end of a turn, each player turn. The other big question in my mind is what I'm going to do with the French in terms of orders. Am I good just pushing forward? I've moved Soule closer so that, you know, I can get orders to him in one turn, to Mortier in one turn. Am I doing what I want to? I think so, more or less. I think I'm okay with the orders that I have. But at some point I'm going to have to try to figure out which way things are breaking and push the French army into a position that it can do the most damage to the Spaniards. And that's about all I have to say. French launch a charge against the Spanish cav. I'm going to launch a charge also against the flank of this Spanish infantry here. The infantry is larger than my cav. I'm hoping that the momentum of cav against a flank attack is going to be of some value, but we're going to have to make a morale check because the cav, the infantry there may end up, yeah, that's my mess, one of many, may end up forming square, in which case, yeah, I don't want to go in. I got to do it here or earlier. It started here. I'm letting them get as close as possible before I make the test. I make the morale check, and the way you represent that, I didn't show this terribly well, is, hey, now we're a square. Well, the cav doesn't want to continue the charge, and they're allowed to blow, and this is turn 3. In order to stop it. But now I've put them in square for whatever that's worth, which isn't a hell of a lot, because I don't have any infantry ready to exploit the situation. Bastiani's cav managed to do their job. It was a close battle, a 1-to-1 with no modifiers. They kind of lucked out there. I didn't calculate it completely. I should have probably hit that one cav with both of the French cav. I thought I just outnumbered them. Except I forgot about, yeah. So actually, I took a loss I shouldn't have on the French cav. Because, right, there's this special rule for Spanish cav. No, I was not hitting flank or melee. Okay. So, otherwise here you can see the French kind of cleared out most of the Spanish troops. The center is all disordered right now. It might recover though. But speaking of recovery, it's time for the French to start trying. And over here we have a guy, he's got an 8 morale. Now it turns out that you do apply the disordered modifier, so that drops him to a 6. And I don't have my leader there. He's in command, so he can... Okay, so he succeeds, and he's just fine now. And then I have one more here. He's a 7, that drops down to a 5. And he succeeds as well. If they had failed, they would have had to continue retreating. And I guess we're on to the Spanish side to see what they can possibly recover out of this situation. But they look pretty badly mauled right now in terms of their army being disordered. Spaniards, they moved their commander. I'm trying to see where, maybe back here. Yeah, he'll be giving a modifier there, and that puts all the turn 1 disorders into command. Sort of, kind of. Here's the thing. When command is determined isn't clearly defined in the game, but my feeling is, the way I've been heading for it, is you kind of make that decision before any movement. And remember, there was something that kind of followed that. But this could be problematic because I moved him to put units in command that could rally back here. And I'm going to continue with that. Simply as because it's more expedient, and the rules are just not clear enough on anything to judge them as, you know, a really solid, ironclad way of looking at things. I'm looking at this as kind of a very light set of rules that I can play with like I like, and you know, some maps and counters that represent the battles. And under those circumstances, for ease of play, because trying to remember which units are in command, yeah, there's some out of command markers, but not a whole hell of a lot. Trying to remember which units are in command when we get down to the rally phase seems goofy to me. Plenty of games allow you to move the leader, put units in command for a rally, and that's going to be sufficient for my purposes. So I'll have, you know, different command. Command will be assessed when it's needed, but for movement it's assessed prior to all movement, which to me means I could make some shock attacks over here, which I would have been able to anyhow. Spanish fire was not terribly effective. Neither was the French defensive fire, but it was fairly heavy here on Mortier, and we're starting to... The losses are really catching up on the French, and I'm not sure that they're doing very well at all. At this point, I'm going to launch some big melees. Oh, one thing to note. So this unit, for example, is not getting caught with flanking fire here. I couldn't find the rule on it, but I remember this was the game that had a rule that kind of said, hey, if you've got kind of a contiguous line, and likewise, we wouldn't have flanking fire here. I'm also playing perhaps a little fast and loose with skirmishers. I'm not sure if they have to stay in the front hexes of units, or if they can kind of squirm around. So I've been using them to help cover flanks a little bit. I don't know how much help they do with that, but you know, for example, I've got these disordered units, so I popped out a skirmisher out the side. I'm a little iffy on that in terms of the historical accuracy of throwing a cloud of skirmishers out to do sort of special purpose type work like that. They're still 1 hex away from the unit that produced them, and I'm not sure that I can justify it within the rules, but whatever. Okay, so here we are at the end of the turn. The Spaniards have actually done a fairly good job on their side of the turn, pushing the French formation back. They destroyed that big unit Mortier was on. He's back here. He didn't die. I'm finding things, though, as I look in the skirmish rules. There are some things that make it sound like I'm okay squirting them out sides. They start out in the front, but then it's got this weird statement of how practically the movement of the mother unit is made first, with voltigeurs follow and are set around. Which kind of leads me to believe they have some mobility within that 1 hex range or so. I don't know. Not absolutely clear. However, what is clear is not just this, they're not considered as units, but a little above, they do not trigger opportunity fire by themselves, and they cannot be attacked in any way, which I think gets rid of this -1 if target is skirmish. I think what that's meant to be is -1 if there's a skirmisher in the way. I've been applying a -1 for each skirmisher in the way, which may or may not be the correct thing. It's the reason the French don't have a cloud of them in front of their artillery as well, because, you know, hey, we don't want to pay the penalty twice, and we have more firepower over on that side. But we'll make that decision a little later. The rallies, so-so. Our Spanish commander is fallen back with some of the units that he failed to rally, but he did manage to rally 1, so that's kind of good. They don't rout when they fail to rally. They just fall back. If they get a real disorder, they will rout, though. And yeah, we had both melee attacks were successful. One of them destroyed a unit. There was only 1 strength point yet. So one thing I got to be careful about, and one of the reasons I looked at the skirmisher rules, but again, they don't really describe this fully, is I feel like they count as a strength point that's been detached. With statements like a unit cannot deploy more than the number of lost steps they have left. Stuff along that line. I've also been not putting a big enough cloud. I've been putting 1 out per unit. But it's not clear that they actually do count as a full step that's out there. So I've been getting additional firepower. That's fine. Firepower doesn't get reduced by step loss, but also, and they don't affect the morale of the mother unit, but also I've been kind of ignoring the effect of skirmishers on the strength of the units that have detached them, and I'm not sure that's correct. I think if I attach the skirmishers, I've got more melee strength if I absorb them back in. But again, the rules just don't really... See, they do not... Yeah, I don't think so. They do not subtract losses when they're deployed, so I think I can more or less ignore them for the purposes of melee. Which I think feels a little funny, because if you strip off those lights, you do lose some of your weight of your unit. I don't know. I'll cut another screw up of mine. The cav charges, well, the counter charges in particular. When a counter charge is made, each unit in the stack that's been declared to counter charge has to make its own roll. I don't think I've been doing that. First of all, because he mentioned it, and secondly, my memory is kind of saying, yeah, I think I just made 1 roll for it and failed. The problem with that, of course, is if only one of, like if you have a stack of 2 cav and only one of them countercharge, you might be better off taking the charge than, because you'll have a bigger unit overall than getting the advantage of being in, you know, the line formation for the engagement. I don't think that's really true though. I'm trying to see, I can't really, well, it's close. So like this is a 3-point unit in terms of combat effectiveness, and it turns to a 5-point unit. So you get almost as much by countercharging with half a stack group. If you had like 3 units though, it starts to get more and more difficult to make that decision. But most of my cav are stacked at 2, and I think that I don't remember what the size of stacking. Cav has a different stacking than infantry, so I think it's like 7. There's, yeah, 7 steps of cav. All right. So I'm trying to make my decision of what I'm doing with the French, because they're obviously getting their asses handed to them numerically. You know, it looked like things were brightening up in the second turn. This third turn, we're still getting the same kind of losses on the Spaniards, but man, we started increasing our losses heavily on the French. The nice thing about this, though, is the lower morale Spanish units are less likely to recover. So maybe we still have some sort of a chance. So now we're seeing the first use of the command rules other than at the beginning of the game. Soule is detaching. I'm using an aide-de-camp. This is really the replacement leader markers, but I want to use them for dual use here. So I've got them flipped over on the aide-de-camp side rather than the replacement counter. I think that's not really how you're supposed to do it. I don't know. They don't have any values over here. And I've put an attack order under him to indicate that he's carrying the order. He's going to be able to get there in that 1 turn. And that means next turn, if Joseph accepts orders from Soule, he'll end up following them. He's going to have to roll against... basically, you have a compliance, I don't know what it's actually called, and an initiative number, and he'll be rolling against the compliance number, and we'll see how that happens when the unit hits. But this is going to be his order. He hasn't accepted it yet. I'm going to have to come up with a more formal orders managing system, as you know, maybe something along the lines of the CWB stuff. But as of right now, you know, I'm still struggling with this. This is a nice little battle without a lot of orders flying around, so that's pretty good. I'm going to leave Mortier in his current orders. You know, he's pretty beat up, but he has the capacity to pull more units off the center line. Now, this is kind of dangerous because the Spanish center might push up. Soule has no capability to command troops as far as I can see. All he can do is issue orders. And so, but Mortier now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 has command out to here. Joseph has command. Luckily, one of his guard units didn't quite get so far. I've like been spreading the units around. Well, one of the guards started heading towards Mortier, which he can do. You know, it's within the defend orders. It's just kind of goofy. So he's going to have trouble collecting that, but I can pull that unit back under the current orders. And, you know, I'll see if I can break through the center here. The French have taken so many losses, though, on some of their big best units that we don't know. Alrighty. Really not looking too good for the French. I forgot to move this. Let me push this over here. I'll leave this up here so I remember to make an actual check next turn for the orders to arrive, to be processed. Push forward here. We had a unit get disordered, trying to make the melee attack over here. Firepower did very little this turn for the French. And then you can see I failed to rally either of the units. Gets moved. Either of the units that could have this turn. We have no turn 1 units kicking around. I have to keep an eye on that because, like, you know, I search out the 2s and I now need the, I need to make sure I get the 1s as well. That's going to be especially important with the Spaniards with all their disordered units. But yeah, the French are kind of getting left out here in the corner. We had another unit melt over here. The dead pile is growing. I don't know. I think this is going to be a Spanish victory. And this may be largely a factor not of, some kind of a historical situation, in terms of the scenario, as much as me not quite understanding how to launch an attack yet in this system. We'll see. More to it than that, though. There's also being able to read and assess the counters and their strength, especially in relation to the little chart that handles each counter. There's a lot of numbers on these counters, and they're not necessarily in the most familiar places. So getting used to those is going to improve my capabilities, but also realizing that, hey, this is only actually a one-step unit I'm moving forward at this point. That too can be problematic. Spaniards complete their movement portion. Trying to keep as many units in command so I can actually rally them, and this is why Joseph's attack is impressive if it happens, is we've got so many disordered units back here that I can't even rally as long as I'm trying to fight this battle in the center with just one leader. Now, the reason I came in at this point on the video was to show something interesting. Disordered units have firepower. But remember, even though I cheated before, you can't shoot on the skirmishers at all. So these are immune. I can't throw skirmishers out to protect my disordered units. They're not allowed to do that. So this unit's coming forward, and his skirmishers are going to come into play here with the ability to fire, and if they get a lucky shot, further, possibly even rout the French the French unit that's in front of them. So that's pretty potent. In addition, they're also protecting that flank a little bit. I'm not sure how much, because French units could conceivably come smashing, from behind, which might be even worse. The weakness of the French position convinced the Spaniards to push out and try to hit hard. They didn't do too well. Firepower, very little happened from either side. Melee attack from here ended up broken, and let's see. Then during the rally phase, the Spaniards got a few of their units back, but not many. A lot of them are streaming off the map, and then of course I don't have to keep trying to rally them. It's kind of like I use these as my to delimitate the area in which I can roll the rallies. It's kind of like the great battles of history, in the sense that, like, you have the choice. You want to rally it and maybe lose it, or not, except the loss is slower here. But when I counted up total losses, well, we didn't get many this turn. The French have taken 3 additional losses, putting them up to 25. The Spaniards only 1. The amount of pressure that's being placed is much, much less at this point, as the armies are kind of disorganized. I have to kind of make a decision. One thing I can do is I could take advantage of that recuperation rule. If I can find good order units that are kind of damaged, I could have Mortier and Soule recover strength points for those units, and reinvigorate the French position a little bit more quickly than the Spaniards can do. And the Spaniards had the problem of also having to try to rally a whole bunch of units each turn. But it's not like the French army is healthy either, particularly. All right, so that puts us at 12, and there's not a lot of game left for the French to break the Spaniards, and they're taking worse losses than the Spanish are. So I don't know, I'm probably not being aggressive enough here, but it feels like I'd have a broken French army if I was much more aggressive. As I'm being silly, I thought this was my end of game. No, it's way down here on turn 15. So I've got quite a bit of game left for the French to try to break the Spanish army. All right, well, I guess it's time to resolve this order. Now, have not done this yet. This is going to be the tactical orders. See, 17.6. Obeying orders. Okay. The obedience will generally be a value from 3 to 5, but I've got to find it. It's the lower value according to the lower placement. Okay, it's an asterisk. I guess Joseph is supposed to be the army leader most of the time. And there are no rules for it. So I don't know if he's intended to be able to, you know, just do orders without, to just come up with his own orders, as it were. Instead, though, I'm going to play it as this. And what do? We roll one die and see if it's less than or equal to, I would guess. Of course, that's not explained here. It's when the leader receives a new order, he must do an obedience check. The order is accepted if the die roll is less than or equal to. Okay, yeah, it is. All right, so on a 1 through 4, Joseph accepts the order. If he fails, then we make a delay check. And he does fail, so now we roll again. And on a 1 through 4, next turn it takes place. Otherwise, 2 later turns, and on a 6, the order's gone. And the order's just gone. Okay. Well, this is an interesting situation. The general. So what goes on with this is, I think I can send the order again immediately. Maybe not this turn, but next turn. So Joseph is not going to be getting that order, and I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably just cross it out over here. Now, again, there isn't a lot of support for these orders in terms of like describing what your recording should be, etc. It's all kind of left up to you, almost as though, hey, if you've played a CWB type game or something, you probably have a fair idea of how to write these orders. But if you haven't, this is a hard concept to kind of figure out on your own how you want to record it and how to handle it. So that's just going to be an issue for new players. But you know, if you're looking for something to replace the NBS because it's not going to extend very far, you know, there's no indication that any more games after Talavera are coming out. So got one over there, which is a real shame because it's a very cool system. This at least gives you some start on what an order system should be, but it's, you know, as light, it's so poorly and lightly defined that it's just kind of a, you know, you kind of have to know what you're doing already to implement it, I think. Half turn for the French as they break up sort of that center of the Spaniards now that was pushing forward. There's still a unit out here, but the French also got a heavy rallies. Rallies are not that easy in this game. You know, a unit like this, which is a fairly solid unit with a 7 morale, it needs a 5 in order to rally in general. So you can see those, and that's assuming they haven't taken any hits. This guy didn't succeed, but most of them did. This guy didn't get a chance to rally because Sebastiani launched a charge, which he probably was required to launch last French turn, but he didn't because he was recycled. With the orders, you kind of have to press with a certain number of units, and it's a strict number of units. So if you have a small force, it kind of always has to attack, but if you have a larger force, you have a smaller number of units. But I didn't really look that up, and you know, I'm okay. The game is loose enough that I feel like mistakes figure in with everything else fairly well. We'll move on to the Spanish side of the turn. As we push here through the noon turn, things turned overall pretty poorly for the Spaniards. Largely, right off the bat, they did a charge here. Now, they had the big advantage, but they took a morale check, and because they were over here, they couldn't retreat here. They routed off the map, and it ended up being a couple of big cav units, a decent number of steps just gone all at once. It worked out very poorly for them. So now Sebastiani has kind of won the big cav battle. Elsewhere, well, they were set up for nice attacks on Mortier over here, and then ended up breaking, covering their artillery to some extent so that they can't just have it meleeed into non-existence. Some holes appeared in their lines. You can see whatever they had back here is gone, and they did get some decent rallies back here. See a few units that came back, but a lot more didn't. Their units are so weak that it's really hard for them to recover once they take losses. Yeah, that's part of this. Okay. We're starting to see an advance from these guys who are in a square as they're pulling back to join the rest of the command. Right now, because this didn't rally or couldn't rally, I don't feel as threatened from the cav as I would normally. But our numbers come out, yeah, wow. 3 more losses by the French over the course of this turn. 13 by the Spanish. Most of them were those cav. I don't know what that was, like 7 or 8 steps. But still, they've taken a lot of steps this turn overall. So they're struggling at this point. Firepower going one way or the other in terms of effectiveness with the French turn. Not sure which way these guys are facing. I always have trouble with vertex facing. Just things seem to get confused more easily. I know I didn't cause any casualties to the Spaniards. They may have caused one to the French. But you can see the French are beginning to pull some of their reserves back into place. And we also had some rallying, which was effective. Not as surprising for the French. We sent those orders out again. Now, I could have just sent Soule over there, but he's kind of performing a good deed in terms of rallying units. So splitting up seemed wise. They do still have some infantry under this artillery, which is a big deal because the Spaniards could conceivably march forward, except their leader's down here, I think. So I guess I'm not in any real threat unless he starts moving. Army commanders have only half the movement allowance, but I don't know if he counts as an army commander because he's just such a weird character in this. He is a corps commander, really, as far as I can tell. As the 12:30 turn goes, the Spaniards trying to pull back here. It's hard to move and maneuver these units. Sometimes the only way to get a unit to turn around and move properly, throw it into column and do an about face and march, and then do another about face. And that can sometimes get you to move back a hex where you wouldn't normally be able to be. As you can see, this structure is not exactly what I'd want facing the French cav, but I'm having some trouble with maneuvering. It almost feels like the lines are a little too rigid. Now, this is really the Spanish units, so maybe that's appropriate. The French units have a little bit more mobility with 4 movement points and 6 in column, whereas the Spanish are 3 movement points with 5 in column, and that 5 in column is just it's hard to do the movement. Let me grab a dead unit. So if I've got this like this, I can flip it into, that costs 1, that's free, 2, 3, free, 4, and then I'm okay. But and I still have an extra movement point, so I could have actually backed up 2 hexes with a Spanish unit in clear terrain. Once you get to this rougher terrain, it's harder. And of course, if you're withdrawing from a firing zone, boom, you take hits. I've got to be careful. Some French units may have been withdrawing from these artillery zones, and I haven't paid attention. Those go out 2 hexes instead of 1. Spaniards being a little bit cleverer than they were before, pushing some of these units back so that they can try to rally them. Of course, that weakens the amount of forces I have here, but, you know, disorganized shit isn't going to hold up anyway. And we launched some attacks. The melee cracked the morale here, and we had a route through that caused subsequent routes, which is kind of cool. I always like games that have that. You route through a unit, you make a morale check for it. During the rally, the Spaniards lost a couple more units, one of which was a big unit, and that comes to our costs now. We're at 32 for the French, 41 for the Spanish. And, you know, we're getting to the point where maybe I don't want to try to rally the bigger units. This was kind of silly that are on the map edge. Where the line of communications isn't absolutely clear to me. Maybe it would have been legitimate to keep retreating towards this road because it was a unit maybe here or something. But it's such a cluttered mess down there that, you know, it seemed to me that breaking off the field made some sense. Next turn, we've got some French reinforcements coming. The only reinforcements in this scenario. And, well, I don't know how it's turning out, but it looks more positive for the French than it did not too long ago. Looking for the reinforcements, I did find the line of communications defined here. This is for the Spaniards. It's Madrid and Aranjuez. These 2 roads. So heading towards either of them is legitimate. And for the Spaniards, it would be the road to Cadiz, which I may have been able to save a unit. I'm not going to worry about it, because I don't think it's unreasonable that they go fleeing in this direction either. Now, we're going to get something somewhere on the most eastern trail of the North map border. I guess that's over here. We've got a couple of units. And they don't have a commander or anything, so they're going to be coming in, you know, in some kind of road column and trying to join up with, I think they're Cav, so they'll be joining up with the Cav commander. And giving him that extra edge could be really important, because initially the Spaniards have the Cav advantage, but at this point the French have kind of won. There's only 1 Spanish Cav unit left here, mainly because the others routed off the map. There is a command up here with a couple, but haven't really been doing anything. Okay, Joseph got his orders and turns his artillery primarily to be able to fire that way. Marches forward with his guard. He's got to be very careful here because the Spaniards have cavalry. Now I have my guard cav, which is fair quality. So, you know, I'm hoping that the guard cav can kind of hold off any attacks by the Spanish cav, and we can collapse this flank. Now, but the reason I have to be careful is I had to set up my cav so it's going to be right on the edge of the French cav. I didn't have a real opportunity to charge. I think I was back here 1, 2. That puts me to like 9 or something. I must have been here. I don't know. Anyway, I think I'm only able to get this far, to tell you the truth. But the point is, I'm kind of protecting the flank here, and I'm preventing the Spaniards from being able to launch a charge. But most importantly, I don't want the infantry marching up on the cav, because then they get countercharged and they don't get a chance to square. They're just in a lot of trouble under those circumstances. So I've got to be careful with the interaction. We have a charge going on here. Units coming down here. I haven't figured out what I'm doing in the center though. Okay, exchange of... so, I have this general problem. When I'm playing any game as the French, I play it as if I'm the English. I don't care if it's infantry or navy. So, back when I played, Flying Colors, which, there it is up there, and it's ilk. I feel like firepower is the most important thing, and you want to shoot for the hull and everything. And the French actually have disincentives to do that. But when I played that game out, shooting at the rigging just didn't work very well, as I've noticed with most naval games. It is not a good general policy, and the French have an advantage in that in terms of their training. Now, in this, I tend to leave my units in line when I attack, and the reason for that is, hey, you know, the firepower happens first. I want to soften the enemy up with the musket fire, and then give them the bayonets as an option. But I know I'm going to have to face their firepower, and also, after I make my attack, I'm sitting there and I'm in a defensive position for the next round, especially with my high morale, and I want to be able to unload some more lead into them before they get a chance to bayonet me. Well, what that means is I march forward like this. Now, one of the reasons that I've been doing that is it seems kind of inefficient to just get a point of melee, but it's not really a point of melee. See, when you flip these guys over, what you're getting is 1 point for every point of strength you have. So if you've got a melee strength of 2 to begin with and you're going up to a 3, you're adding 50% to your melee value, which is actually significant. So, you know, it's just, I have this real strong inclination towards conducting, you know, my units at a firepower range and keeping them in their line formation so they can fire. And I don't know, you know, psychologically what's up with that. Anyway, the center didn't want to pursue as aggressively as they could against, say, the disrupted units, because there were units which could take advantage from the Spanish point of view and get some flanking fire. Not that that's all that effective in this design, but it does cause morale penalties if you end up having to make a check. So I kind of went lightly in there, using skirmishers instead of going all out. One thing I did succeed in doing was a melee against the artillery here. There was another unit, an infantry unit in there. The infantry unit broke. With the optional rules for the artillery, as far as I can see, you get to sort of spike the guns if they're deployed, because the gun crew runs, the guns stay behind. And, well, maybe I have to advance to do that. Yeah, I think I have to advance, actually, into the hex to spike the guns. So I'm going to leave this as, because I chose not to advance. Now maybe I want to, but the reason I chose not to advance is, again, I'm exposing too much of my flank when I do so. Very little in the way of rallies, because I'm not quite sure why this guy failed, is basically it, because a lot of the units are kind of low on this. I chose, the cav charge, it got rid of drove the Spanish cav away, great. And then it managed to hit one of their infantry from behind. That was positioned back here somewhere. And it didn't form square. And it broke the infantry as well. So we've got a lot of, you know, disordered units which are not terribly good. Now, disordered units are not like routed units. They still get to fire 1 point strength and la la la. It's just that they're not very effective, and they're very likely to just completely fall apart if they're left in the line, which is, you know, why this group started leaving. And now the line's weaker, and Joseph's finally coming in. All right, let's get to the Spanish side of the turn. Spanish, trying to find something to do with their cav, launched an attack on these disordered guys. That didn't go terribly well. I thought it was going to be really impressive. It was kind of so-so, honestly. That means they left these guys open, who are available now to go pursuing some of the disordered units, which they're very good at doing. They're not like cav, but it's just a very a much easier attack to make, because the disordereds have a melee value of 1. Now, that, again, that's not 1 strength point total. That's 1 per stacking point, which takes some getting used to, I have to say. I made that error a little bit. The Spanish were able to line up some nice shots, and maybe a melee, I'm not sure. In here, where they got a melee here, where they were able to kind of, you know, cut off some of these French units that were in the lead. They're making it very ugly for them to get out of there. With all these disordered units, only 1 unit that Soule managed to rally last turn, so there's not a lot of reinforcements coming in from that direction. The French army is kind of small. On the other hand, the Spanish army is kind of big, and it's all routing right now. Well, disorganized. And most of the rallies have not succeeded, although we do have a few units. And overall, we have more functional units on the field. Numbers, the French paid a heavy toll here this time. It's now down to 42, 49. I've got to think about, you know, the possibility of trying to recuperate units, but it looks like such a pain in the butt, because your leaders always have something to do, and they have to stack with the units in order to start recuperating strength. So it may just be one of those things, that one of those options, and it's like every now and then you may want to do it, but generally you probably just ignore it anyway. All right, we're going to send this one up. This is, I guess, the 1 p.m. turn, because we're, you know, I guess about halfway through, and turns aren't taking that long to describe anymore.